past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star. Opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood.
Good afternoon and welcome back. Can we really admit how completely effed up we are? Is Donald Trump destroying the American economy and the American empire? More precisely, is the Trump administration accelerating the demise of the United States internally and externally? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is the U.S. truly at the end of the road of empire? My guest is an independent journalist whose work can be found at Substack and thepolemicist.net. His latest piece is entitled Collapse. It is a ship of fools and it's sinking. Dr. Jim Kavanagh. As always, Jim, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Wilmer. Always a pleasure.
So before we get to your piece, last week, President Donald Trump announced far-reaching new tariffs on nearly all U.S. trading partners, a 34% tax on imports from China and 20% on the EU, among others. In response to that, the American stock market tanked, as did other international markets as well. Now, earlier today, Trump dropped tariffs under his new trade plan to 10% on imports from most countries, as he announced a 90-day pause for higher so-called reciprocal tariffs that took effect in many countries this week, while he raised the tariffs imposed on imports from China to 125%. Jim, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said today that all this is part of a grand strategy. 75 countries have called Trump and are ready to negotiate. The world is ready to work with President Trump to fix global trade. How much of this is the world crying uncle, or is it? It's not 75 countries, it's 75 Congress members and Jamie Dimon who called Trump and said, dude, are you insane? You're tanking the economy. Jim Kavanagh.
Yeah, well, as I say, I think it's a bunch of American capitalists who are calling Trump and saying, we don't like this. This is going to hurt us. I mean, he really is. More than any leftist movement has in the past 20 years, doing kind of fatal damage to American capitalism in the world and the American capitalist empire. And I don't really even think he understands it. Obviously he doesn't. So I don't know. It's extremely difficult to know where this is going to go because he's got a lot of political wind in his sails and people are a little bit afraid of him. But the ruling class isn't afraid of him. I mean, they'll talk back to him. This is I pointed out in my article, this is really, it's not a policy, this reciprocal tariffs, these crazy tariffs that put 50% on Lesotho and 10% on uninhabited Penguin Islands. And as I said, I cited the early 20th century Protective Tariff Association railing against the kind of one-size-fits-all reciprocal tariffs that Trump is proposing. And I don't know how this has lasted how many days? 1 day, 24 hours, 36 hours? How much can it last? But the damage is being done to the American empire and to the American capitalists, America as the guarantor of capitalism in the world. And it's not going to be undone. You lose trust by doing things like this. You play the bully when you don't have the power. You play the bully because 30 years ago you could do that. 70 years ago you could do that. Now the kids have grown up and they're too strong and they're not going to be bullied. And you play the bully and you contemptuously tell the people you forced into a certain kind of global economic order that they have to get out of it now because you don't like it anymore. I saw this thing today that some French economist who's a very strident anti-China hawk said that Europe has to start making an alliance with China now against the United States. That's what's going to happen. I mean, the United States thinks it's punishing these other countries. It's punishing itself and isolating itself. And Europe and certainly the rest of the countries of the world already have BRICS, but now Europe and other countries are going to say, we're going to do better in an economic and political alliance with China than with Russia, than with the United States, and Russia, than with the United States, because obviously we can't trust the United States and you don't get that back very easily. So there's going to be damage done all around. To the American capitalists, it'll be done, but also the American people, it's going to be done. And it's going to be very hard to undo.
I was reading a piece, I think yesterday, that this whole tariff fiasco is an opening in Taiwan for China. I read a piece, I want to say it was Thursday or Friday, that Japan and South Korea are in discussions with about stronger economic ties with China. And listening to some of the analysis earlier today, they were saying that Trump is saying, well, we have this incredible trade imbalance with China. Well, when you deindustrialize your country and you ship your industrial base or your need to another country, I'm gonna sound like Johnny Mathis here. Chances are you're gonna have an imbalance.
First of all, you did not sound like Johnny Mathis.
Thank you, Jim Kavanagh.
Whom I love. But secondly, you're absolutely right. What you see here is China, Japan, and South Korea getting into an alliance against the United States. I mean, this is classic. And Taiwan, obviously, they're going to see this and say, whom can we trust? And the answer isn't the United States. And China, whatever it's been a consistent, lawful partner. It has followed the rules. It has done its job. It hasn't bullied anybody. It hasn't been nobody hasn't demanded anything of anybody. It doesn't demand the American or South Korean or Japanese economy become communist or socialist. It doesn't demand anything.
No regime change.
Yeah, no regime change. It's just
Business.
Reciprocally useful win-win relationships. And everybody sees this. This has now gone on for 20, 30 years. People see. I mean, again, the Americans, I didn't until a couple of months ago, really, this last year, understand the extent to which China has developed and is the future. It has developed serious infrastructure, modern, highly advanced infrastructure. It's brought people to a level of out of poverty and into a level of widening prosperity for everybody. This is something, the infrastructure is unbelievable. You didn't do that with tariffs. It didn't do that by cheating on something on the tariff deals. It did it by state-directed, planned, mass investment and infrastructure building and setting up, having a plan to set up and to move the country forward. That's what you need. Tariffs aren't going to solve the problems that the United States has. They're not going to solve it. It's, as you say, it's 20, 30 years of not only outsourcing production, but turning the internal economy of the United States into a playground for financial speculation, where private equity buys up everything and just turns the entire country into a machine for vacuuming social wealth into the hands of fewer and fewer people through financial manipulation. And you're not going to turn that around with tariffs. You need an entirely different kind of approach to the economy. As I say, this is, to a certain extent, this is, the answer based on decades of policy, not just Trump, to America's economic and social degradation. That it's the answer to the American question, America's answer to the question, socialism or capitalism, socialism or barbarism, because to continue on the road we're on is barbarism. And people can't afford homes. They can't afford rent. They can't afford healthcare. There's no good jobs. So how are tariffs going to solve that problem? They're not, you don't rebuild an industry that that wasn't stolen from us by China. It was American capitalists who decided to move their factories and who made billions and billions of dollars in extra profits by doing that. And they're the ones who did that. How are you going to take control of those industries? Are you going to take control of the capital that funds American investment in America? The American government could do that because it has infinite capital in a fiat currency, but they're not going to do that. They're just going around saying, we're going to punish you. We're going to be the big kids on the block. We're going to come bully you to do what we want you to do for no good purpose. And the net result is going to be the isolation and the acceleration of the decline of the United States economically at home and abroad, and economically and politically abroad. And you're going to have Russia and Europe and the Asian countries saying, we're going to do better having alliances, economic and political alliances with China and Russia rather than with the United States, because they are powerful economic powers now, and certainly China is, and they're not asking us, they're not bullying us, they're not smacking us over the head. The Europeans felt, because this is the difference between Trump and previous presidents. Previous presidents, the United States was the big dog and they were giving the orders, but they were doing it collegially. And you're part of you're partners, and this is a collegial enterprise. At the end of the day, they did what the United States wanted them to do. Now, Trump's no more collegiality. You just do what I tell you to do. And that contemptuousness is also turning them against it. But he's revealing to them, you've always been our lapdogs. Now I'm going to treat you explicitly and crudely like the lapdogs you've always been. And they're going to have to decide whether they want to keep going along with that or not. And it's already hurt them. So chances are there are other players in the game now. There are other economic powers in the world that even Europe can turn to and say, this would be better for us, having non-conflictual relations, not treating China as an enemy. Why? China's not asking, not your enemy. And having friendly and mutually reciprocally beneficial relations with them. And That's what's going to start happening on a faster and faster scale than it would have if there had been someone like Obama or Biden saying, "Oh no, you're our partners in this, and we'll discuss with you about everything." Trump is cutting out the last 40 years, 50 years, 40 years at least of globalization, the globalization framework that the United States insisted upon. And he's cutting the legs out of the people that the United States, for following the plan, that because he thinks, when we decide to set up a framework of globalization, you'll follow us. And when we decide that's over, then tough luck. So that's what
when we decide it's over, we'll blow up your pipeline.
Yeah. Exactly.
Kevin Baptiste, Mr. Kavanagh, why does the U.S. insist in playing economic chicken with China? We are sure to lose. Before you answer that, let me add one element, maybe two elements. And you mentioned this, but I think it needs greater exposition. And that is, China has a planned economy. And I don't think that really gets enough articulation and understanding about the power of their planned economy. And they invest in their country. They invest in their people. They have pulled, what's the number? 800 million people out of abject poverty over the last 25 years. We can't deal with 800,000.
Yep.
We've got people living under bridges. We have people living in dumpsters. We have people, standing in the middle of the street begging for change. And they've been able to move 800 million people out of abject poverty. And part of their process was when the United States said, we want somebody to, we want to export our manufacturing. They said, we'll take it. Why? Because they then can use that to help create their middle class. And it's working for them, obviously, to our detriment. Jim.
Yeah, look, don't forget, from the end of World War II till the end of the Cold War, till the demise of the Soviet Union, the United States had a role in the world, which was not just to maintain American power, but to maintain capitalist power in the world, to prevent the advance of any post-capitalist socialist or communist society, right? And which they felt was a threat. And they went after any country that tried to institute socialist policies. They were the most anti-democratic force in the world, invading and attacking and regime changing every country from Iran to Guatemala to Santo Domingo to Dominican Republic to Chile, etc. Socialism doesn't work, because every time socialism rears its ugly head, we're the most powerful economic and military force in the world are going to stamp it out, are going to turn it into an enemy. In the context of the Cold War, they used China against Soviet Union. Okay, then when the Cold War ended, when the Soviet Union became essentially a capitalist country, and when China said, "We will allow American investment. We are maintaining our communist identity, but we're going to allow capitalist industries and capitalist relations of production in our society." The United States, that's a great idea, because that's no longer a threat to capitalism, right? And to a certain extent, that's true.
But wait a minute, but China said we will allow it under our condition.
Yes, it was, but they didn't become, from a high level Marxist point of view, there's all kinds of critiques I could make of China, whether it's communist or not. Fact is, they maintained an essential social control over production. It was a social control, the production for social purpose, not primarily for profit. Okay, we'll let you make a profit, but we're going to make sure, on the whole, that the society and the economy is working for the benefit of most people for social purpose. Profit is subordinate to social purpose. In our economy, social purpose hardly exists. The reasons for the economy is to allow the infinite accumulation of wealth by a few people.
Shareholder value.
Exactly. So, but that wasn't perceived as a threat by the United States in the late 70s, because in early 80s it was perceived as, we're the only superpower left, and it's true. It was true after the demise of the Soviet Union. We could control everything. China's a poor country. It was a poor country. So they didn't treat China as an enemy. They treated it as something that was coming over to their side. And suddenly, a few years ago, they woke up to the fact that really they've become much, 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 much more powerful. And our society, which they don't want to acknowledge, has degraded, not because of them, not because they cheated us, but because we allowed our capitalist society to develop in a certain way. And when we had the chance to change it, 2008, 2009, Obama on, we didn't.
We do it.
We continued down that path and accelerated down that path and saved the banksters, not the people. And so that's why people got pissed off at the Democrats. And, we didn't get anything out of this. And Trump comes in and says, I'm the answer to globalization. Of course, his answer is,
who knows what
it's not an answer. It's just a bunch of nonsense. But my point is, so China was able to develop without the kinds of destabilizing threats that were given to visited on other countries who became socialist countries during the COVID. Now they're trying to pull that back out again. Somehow China's an enemy. For what reason? For what reason? Are they going to invade us? What are they going to do? They've just been more successful. That's why they're an enemy, because they're more successful. And we got to defend Taiwan, a province of China. This is something.
And Jim, they're more successful doing it their way.
That's exactly right.
That's it's not, because if they were part of the EU, if they were operating as a capitalist entity, then I don't think we would be having the big issues with them that we're having now, because we would be able to figure out a way to manipulate that and work in that manner. But the fact that they're now more successful doing it a different way, that is, I think, one of the big issues that the American capitalists have with China.
Well, they call it communist, and it is more socialist. It's a fun, in principle, socialist paradigm that they're working with, and that the legacy of Cold War anti-communism is still very much alive in the minds of American, Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, and so it's a communist country. We're going to tackle. But as you say, reality is, every country is going to choose its path of development according to its own needs. They don't want to allow Venezuela to do that. They don't want to allow Cuba to do that. And they have the power. They've had the power to stop them from doing it and to visit real harms on them and try to prevent them from developing economically and socially in the way that they want. They don't have the power to do that with China. And it's annoying the hell out of them. And they're afraid, as with socialism and communism during the Cold War, they're afraid the example is going to prove not only the example now, but China now is a partner and can be a partner of. They're helping these African countries develop, Latin American countries develop. They're helping them to develop in their own way. China's not coming in and saying you have to do things our way, but it's saying let's develop economic relationships which are mutually beneficial. We're not coming here to preach to you, to tell you have to be communist or you have to be socialist or you have to be capitalist or have to be this or that. We have some economic power, and we are willing to sit down with you and have mutually respectful talk. We're not here to change your regime or tell you how to live. We want to have mutually respectful and mutually beneficial economic relationships. And that's working. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Americans are afraid of, because they're afraid it is the case that China becomes the world's preeminent economic and political power. That's going to be an example, again, of what you have to do, what you can do if you have a planned economy with a tremendous amount of social investment and social planning and infrastructure building, and not this dog-eat-dog, Shark Tank entrepreneurial capitalism that we think is so great.
And there's another element to this as well that is, I think, incredibly frightening to the United States, and that is when you look at polling of Chinese people, they love their government.
Yep.
And these aren't internal Chinese polls. These are polls from Pew. These are polls from Harvard and Pew, polls from Princeton that have gone in and conducted independent polling of Chinese people, and well over 70% of Chinese people like their government. And there are those that will, respond here and, China's this, China's that. Well, and maybe China is all of those things, but that's for the Chinese people to figure out. That's not for me to judge. I don't live in China and I'm not Chinese. That's for them to figure out. Leave them alone and let them do what they do. And when the Chinese people have had enough, then the Chinese people will handle that business. But it's not for us. It's not for us to decide. Where was it here? Ruminations with Andrew. What's the solution? As the U.S. has declined significantly under the Democrats' small d. I don't know if you mean the Democratic Party, and that small d is by accident. Well, let me just a couple of things, and then I'll let Dr. Kavanagh respond. What is the solution? The solution is to come to a realization that the global dynamic has shifted. The world has changed. We are no longer in a unipolar dynamic. The United States is no longer the global hegemon. This is a multipolar reality. So with that, as the United States tries to continue to act as the unipolar hegemon, now you're trying to play hockey with a tennis racket. It's not going to work anymore. And you gotta realize it's not going to work anymore. And so the United States the Americans have to come to a reality check that we now need to cooperate with the world. We can no longer control the world. And this whole idea of, well, we still have the strongest military. Nah, you got more aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
But ask Ansar Allah how afraid they are of the American military. Ask Iran how afraid they are. Ask Russia how afraid they are. That game has changed as well. Dr. Kavanagh.
Yes, absolutely. And we can't bully countries economically or militarily anymore. And it's maybe the most dangerous thing is that American leaders, certainly Trump, just don't psychologically get that. Trump thinks he can bully. He's the big dog, and he's the big kid on the block, and they'll do what he wants. When wants to start a war, we want to start a war, we'll start it. And we think it's time to end it, then nobody is going to dare not continue fighting. If we want the Russians to stop fighting in Ukraine, they'll stop because we said so. And they wouldn't dare continue fighting if we stop. So this is extremely dangerous, overestimating your own power and underestimating those of the people you consider your enemies. And that's certainly the case with Russia militarily and with China militarily. And not only them, but with countries like Iran too, who can hurt us. But I want to address something about what that question was. What can we do? Because this is the terrible thing. What can we as Americans do about the political situation in the United States of America? What can we do when we're faced with a political choice between a sleep, a non-compos mentis guy who's purportedly running the government and a clown like, stupid bully like Trump? And who's going to give us another political alternative? This is a profoundly unsettling question for me. And while I think it's one of the reasons I think we're in trouble, because, as I said in my article, first of all, the structure of the United States polity and, the federal government, et cetera, is such that if we were to elect a president who was a real progressive and was fighting for universal health care, job guarantees, housing guarantees, public banking,
a living wage.
Yeah, living wage, family wage, capping interest rates. This is a simple thing to do. It's crazy to have 20-25%. That's used to be illegal. You have cap interest rates at 5%. You don't need
it's called
this,
usury.
This is, it's usury. So I'm saying if we elected a president somehow to do that, that president would have to be doing the kinds of things Donald Trump is doing. He'd have to be purging the bureaucracy of obstructionists. He'd have to be using his executive power to a greatest extent as possible and pushing its limits against the courts and the Congress and the media. But even worse than, so we got to reckon. When I see things like that, it's like when I see January 6th, I'm saying, oh, why aren't we doing that?
Right.
That, unfortunately, the way change is going, unfortunately, there's no possibility I see on the horizon of electing someone like that, because there's no possibility of building a political movement, because the structures of the electoral system and the structures, they're such that they block and make it impossible. Look what happened to the Bernie movement, and what it cost. And now the Democrats want to say, oh, we got to go back to Bernie. Too late. You showed us what game you're playing with that. So we need an independent political movement independent of these two capitalist and completely bought and sold Zionist capitalist parties. But it's extremely, extremely difficult to build. And it requires massive militant, it's going to require massive militant action. Mm-hmm. January 6th, storming the Capitol, whatever it is, the kinds of demonstrations we had in the cities for the George Floyd thing, the kinds of demonstrations we had in the 60s and the 70s over Vietnam, civil rights, that's what it's going to require. And it requires some kind of political leadership that emerges from that pushes for the most important essential demands, as you say, living wage, healthcare, housing, end to the imperialist and Zionist wars. You cannot be anti-war and anti-Zionist. You cannot be, anti-war and Zionist. You cannot be anti-racist and Zionist. You cannot be free speech and Zionist. You cannot be America first and Zionist. So this is one of the things that we have to have, because neither of the parties are ever going to give that up. And it's one of the things you have to develop a political movement that has strength in the streets. Because again, the electoral system is designed to prevent anything from happening. So that's why I'm sorry, but I'm extremely pessimistic about things, because I've seen a lot of it before, and the anger is there, the resentment is there, but it's so easy in the way the political education of this country is driven by the mass media and by everybody from Fox to MSNBC, and that's the choices we have, and the Democrats and Republicans, and we got to get out of it. We got to get out of it, and you tell me how.
Well, we start by reading your piece, Collapse. It is a ship of fools and it's sinking. You write, quote, "We are truly at the end of the road. It's a road along which we have been alternately force marched and slow walked for decades, and we're at the point where our toes are hanging off the edge of the cliff. The abyss beckons. No one is going to pull us back." Dr. Kavanagh.
Well, yeah, sorry, but that's where I feel. I lived through it. Vietnam, then there was a movement after that. Really, the 70s were a time when things were changing. We had the church committee. You had the possibility of things changing, and nothing came of that. And then you had that moment in 2009 with the financial crisis, which was a crisis of capitalism. Everybody was after going through post 9/11 war on terrorism, what a failure that was, and the fact that we had war after war after war that we were going in through the Bush regime, the Iraq war especially, which was a war for Israel. His people said it. That's what it was for. Israel wanted to do what Wesley Clark said. We're going to go after Iraq and all these other countries because they wanted to remove from the table all the Arab countries that were supporting the Palestinian resistance, that had military power and economic power to support the Palestinian resistance. And that's what every one of those was about. Iraq, Libya, Syria. And they succeeded in those things. Okay. And, people did, and the so-called anti-war left and the, anti-Bush and progressives just let it happen. They forgot about it. They thought, oh, this is not important to us. This idea of progressive accept imperialism and progressive accept Zionism is baloney. But the anti-war movement and there was no anti-Zionism. We now have an anti-Zionist movement, and that's what they're going to come after, and that's what they are coming after now. And there was a kind of complacence about America's role in the world after the demise of the Soviet. We are the biggest country in the world. We're the most powerful country in the world. And Americans, it did not suffer enough in the sense that even though things were getting worse, they did not perceive that as an emergency. I think now that's happened. I think, but the ideological groundwork is, Shark Tank capitalism. And if only
I'm sorry.
become entrepreneurs.
I'm sorry. Take a step back. When you said they didn't suffer, who didn't suffer enough from what? I missed that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is, the inequality increased. Okay. We now have more inequality than France did in 1789
Right.
and greater inequality. So that dynamic was happening, but somehow, and look, after 2008 and under the Obama administration, the Black population lost wealth.
Right.
People, everything. So things were getting worse. But as I'm saying, this is the power of ideology. What I call
Americans didn't suffer enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Americans were suffering, but they didn't experience it as this is a crisis of the system that I have to do something about as a crisis of the system, as opposed to, oh crap, I'm losing my job. Oh crap, I can't afford to live wherever. It's perceived and lived by the Americans as an individual problem, not as a social problem that can be addressed with a social and political movement. Because the social and political movement they put their hopes in, which was the Obama Democrats, took them a while to lose faith in it. And so now where are we? But the ideological underpinning of the country is this Shark Tank entrepreneurialism is, we should all be free to be entrepreneurs, and that's what's going to save us, and stop taxing us, and get the regulations out of the way, and open the doors to entrepreneurism. And this is the idea that you have billionaire populism, and we're all what John Steinbeck said, temporarily embarrassed capitalists, which is usually translated as temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Mm-hmm.
It's the casino capitalism. That's the answer, is kind of figure out some way to win the capitalist lottery. And the answer, the alternative to that is a generally principled level, a socialist understanding that this is a society, that we have to plan things together as a society, that we have to have an economy which benefits. Primary purpose is to make sure that prosperity and social stability and social security are given to everyone, not given to everyone, but that the workers who create the wealth of society control the wealth of society, control the distribution and the production and distribution of goods and services and money, which we can do. And we are giving up our power to do that. So these are things that we have to understand are possible. But, there's a few of us who say it, and more and more people are hearing it, but we're going to have to fight in some militant way against the structures that exist, the legal and political structures that exist, to prevent that from ever turning into a political movement. And the first thing is to get out of what Chuck Schumer says is my job is to keep the left in the Democratic Party. Keep the left in favor of Israel. My job is to keep the left Zionist. What Bernie Sanders' job is to keep the left in the Democratic Party. That's what their job is. We got to get out of that. The left is not in the Democratic Party, is not a party of the left, never was, and will not be. Okay. And if you want a party for a socialist movement, you're going to have to build it. It's going to have to come out of working class, and they can't be, but they're fooled by Trumpism. They're fooled by that kind of right-wing populism.
And racism.
Yeah, which is part of the American look. It's part of the American history and American ideology. They still haven't gotten over atavistic. I mean, things have changed in that respect greatly. And the election of a black president, and the election not only a black president, but black politicians control cities. They control a lot of the politics of the country. But that hasn't been a solution for the black people or for anybody else. And the fact that it hasn't been a solution, and that inequality and social penury have increased, have created a backlash about that. But that we have to get over that. I mean, this business, we see this censorship going, eliminating Harriet Tubman from the Underground Railroad thing. Is I spend my time in Western Pennsylvania now, small town of Western Pennsylvania. This was a hub of the Underground Railroad. I have a friend, blonde, white woman, right? She has an Underground Railroad museum, and she's got the local brewery to do, beers for the heroes of the Underground Railroad, the local heroes of the Underground, the black slaves. She had the descendants of a black slave who escaped here, and people here fought the slave catchers, and progressive judges, anti-abolitionist judges fought the slave catchers when they came out and said, well, this is the law of the land, said not here. So this is a white working class mining area that had a lot of progressive abolitionists, anti-slave, and people have forgotten about that. And they've been turned by the same things that happened with when George Herbert Bush said, the welfare queens, and Ronald Reagan, the welfare queens, and all of this stuff. This has all been turned into that. And that's a shame. And we can build that back. It's possible. Things have changed a lot. My life, no question about it. The position of black people in the United States has changed radically. But that was the deliberate program of we need to create a black middle class. That's what the ruling class said. We have to have a black middle class, and they created it. Now, still, the black population as a whole fell behind. So you've got to be able to look beyond the creation of a middle class and look at the condition of society and all the groups in it as a whole. And that's hard to do in our society.
When you mentioned not suffering enough, what came to my mind was the Russia dynamic in World War II. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but when a lot of folks in the West don't understand the mindset of President Putin and the mindset of Russians, because in World War II, the United States lost 480,000 and the Russians lost 27 million. And so when you are from a country that lost 27 million people in a war, you have a different reality when it comes to war. So your perceptions of threat are different. Your perceptions of response to those threats or perceived threats are different. And so when the West starts putting NATO countries on your border, you say, wait a minute now, been through this once, not going to do this again. And I'm not saying that to validate anything. I'm saying that to explain a mindset and a response. And if you don't understand that mindset, then you'll never be able to solve the conflict.
Yeah, that's very important. And I quote, there's an analyst, he's kind of stopped for a few years, called the Saker, and he gave this little aphorism that I think is very powerful and very correct. The Russians do not want war, but they're ready for it. The Americans want war, and they're not ready for it. The Russians know what it is to be at war, to be in a war, to have, as you say, Vladimir Putin's mother, his brother was killed.
Right.
In the siege of Leningrad, one of the worst sieges in history, 2 million people. People were eating cannibalism, eating horses, I mean, it was one of the worst sieges in history. And nobody in Russia doesn't know what it's like to be at war. And what it's like is terrible. It's destructive. But they will fight because they know it's what they did. They fought as a country and they overcame that, and the Americans are always talking about war. We're going to attack Iran. We're going to attack China. We're going to attack here. We're going to go to war with Iraq. We're going to we're going to attack Panama. We always talking about war,
and haven't won anything in the last 70 years.
And war has not come to us. That's your point. I mean, the most people we lost in the past 80 years is 3,000 people in 9/11. You know what I mean? And as you say, even in World War II, we lost a couple of 100,000 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing like what happened in the rest of the world. Okay. So war isn't coming for us, and we're not ready. The Americans aren't ready to, forget the American military for a second, which isn't ready either, but the American people aren't ready to actually be in a war.
Mm-hmm.
And you're getting to a situation where, we're not going to be able to attack Russia, and it's all going to happen over there.
Right.
That wouldn't happen over there. It's not going to happen China. Well, it's not going to happen. Chinese are going to sit there, oh, we're going to let you in your snug harbor over there be comfortable. No. So you got to be ready for that. And you have to have the country as a whole committed to a cause. We don't have that. We're in Shark Tank land. We're all, every person for himself. The Russians and the Chinese, they're going to fight. They know what colonialism is. They know what the having their country invaded to be slaughtered by Nazis is. So we have to realize as Americans that we're kidding ourselves about our power. We don't have, forget the military person. We don't have the intellectual, we haven't developed the power to say to ourselves, we are ready for war. And we're nonchalant about it. Oh, let's attack this. Let's attack that. No, those countries aren't nonchalant about it. If they have to engage in a military exercise because they think it's really, really important for them, not because they want to protect Israel or because we don't want Chile to have a socialist country, to have a socialist economy. They're not going to do that.
It's
a very, very difficult situation.
You write in your piece, where'd we go here? The Trump administration is engineering the final collapse of the American economy and empire using aggressive, simplistic versions of bipartisan policy frameworks that have underlain American politics for a long time. First, when you say engineering, do you mean that in the context of intentional?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
they are laying the foundation.
They're intentionally doing what they're doing, but I don't think they understand the consequences.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think so many people have been hoodwinked by Trump, because everybody was so pissed off at the Democrats, and rightfully so. I mean, the Democrats deserve to be despised for what they did. They failed, and they don't acknowledge it. They don't look at it, and they're not going to acknowledge that this is what we did that was really wrong, and it's our fault, nobody else's, in other words, it's going to be everybody else's fault. So, but Trump, they built up Trump as the anti-establishment guy. I mean, how many times do we talk about this on Critical Hour? My God, what are they doing? They're creating him as a hero of anti-establishmentism. He's the one we're afraid of. He's the one we're afraid is going to upend the whole system. And he went with that completely, and he used it. So now he's come, and people went along with that. Even some people on the left were like, oh, maybe he'll do this or that good thing because, he might do one or two good things, but he might get us out of the war. He's not even going to get us out of the war in Ukraine, but that's another. What I'm saying is everybody can do one or two good things. But on the whole, Trump is a jingoistic, stupid American exceptionalist who doesn't and thinks that just doing away with soft power, being just the bad cop, not the good cop, is going to be the best. Just the only reason we haven't succeeded so far, because all these Democrats were weaklings. Joe Biden was I'm going to be the strong man, and they'll all be intimidated by me. They weren't intimidating enough to Putin and Xi, and I'll be intimidating to Putin. That's what he really thinks. I believe that's what he really thinks. I don't think he thinks much beyond that. And so this is a danger, an immediate danger. That means that the actions he's taken, and you can see it right away. they're stupid. They're self-destructive, both in terms of the country and in terms to him politically. He's committing political suicide. People are going to despise him as they came to despise the Democrats, and it's going to happen pretty fast. And I think the only people who are quickly going to stand up to him with enough power are American capitalists, whose fate he is now destroying, because you can't get it back. I mean, America is no longer the most important, the strongest economic power in the world, or no longer alone in its military power, and it is undermining the world capitalist system in a way that's dangerous to them. And when you do that kind of destruction, I say you just can't get it back quickly. You can't say, I'm going to do these tariffs, then take them back and say, oh, I didn't really mean that. Forget about it. They're not going to forget about it. They see what you're capable of and how stupid you are.
And stupid and reckless. You list there a couple of the headers in your piece. You talk about, in terms of the problems or the problem areas. One is the Z factor, and the other is the muskrat.
Well, yeah, the Z factor is Zionism, and again, this is over now. This is over. Zionism is an enemy of humanity, okay? And the United States is a Zionist country. They are, and by allying itself with Zionism and by being the power of Zionism in the world is from the United States. Everybody sees what they're doing in Gaza. This is slaughter. This is intentional killing of children, doctors, teachers, journalists. Intentional. They say it. There's no question about it.
In the Nuremberg trial records, they came up with the concept of total war, and they were talking about that under normal circumstances there are the rules of war, that even though you're in a conflict and an armed conflict, morality still exists, that there are certain things you don't do. You don't take captives as slaves. You don't fire upon innocent civilians. You don't kill women. You don't attack hospitals. There are certain things, even in war, that are out of bounds. And they said, when they went back and looked at what transpired in Nuremberg, they said the Third Reich ignored all of that, and they went to the concept of total war, which others would call scorched earth. And that's where we are now. And the other point I'll make is, so the folks don't want to jump on we're anti-Semitic bandwagon. Folks, please understand that not all Jews are Zionists, and not all Zionists are Jews. Dr. Jim Kavanagh.
Oh, yeah. The vast majority of Zionists in the world aren't Jews by many orders of magnitude. There are many anti-Zionist Jews, many of whom are in the forefront of the current anti-Zionist movement and are going to continue to be crushed by the repression that's coming from the Trump administration against the anti-Zionist movement. That's directed. There's no worse enemy for them than anti-Zionist Jews. But yeah, I mean, we have to realize, I don't think the Nazis made a point of destroying hospitals. I mean, you have 10 children a day being amputated without anesthesia. You have more journalists being killed in the last year and a half than were killed in all of World War II. I mean, this is, I don't know about the children thing, but because there's a lot of mass killing in World War II, but deliberately being shot and sniped and shot at by snipers. And when they liberated the concentration camps and brought the townspeople in to show them what was going on, they were like, "Oh, I'm shocked. I didn't know this is terrible." They were ashamed. Israeli populace knows what's going on. We know what's going on. We see it. This is worse. This is horrible. This is a stain upon humanity as Americans and the European population, too, the European countries. This is something that would not be done to a populace that was considered human as the Jewish settlers. And this is a kind of, this is colonial racism of the worst kind, and it's like Leopold or the Nazis, or this is horrible. And we've no excuse for it. Everybody knows it now. The European governments and the American government can pretend that they don't know it or that it's okay. And the rest of the world despises the United States. And that's not the kind of thing you can get over. You're not going to get over this any more than the Germans got over the Nazis. You don't get over this. This is horrible. And it's not over. It's continuing, and we're watching it. So,
and there's a reason why, and that's to me a great transition to go and talk about the muskrat, because there's a reason that Elon Musk has been in Germany backing these the right party in the semi-Nazi parties in Germany.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody's now, but that's the legacy. That's a legacy that's been here in this country since 1948. We've built up ideologically, culturally, massively a sense, Zionism is a great thing. It's great to have a Jewish state in the Middle East. This is something that's part of America. Zionism is part of American identity, not just a Jewish identity. It's part of American identity. And that's been drummed into people, and that's the main thing that's hard to overcome now. But it is being overcome with the anti-Zionist movement. But the Musk thing is built on another legacy ideology that exists, and it's very important. Please see my video on how to stop this change. And this is the ideology that we need. We have to get money from somewhere. That the federal government has to get revenue. It doesn't. We have a fiat monetary system. The federal government can create money. It does create money at will. Taxes do not pay for government programs. Government spending creates money and puts it in the economy. Taxes extinguish it. Okay. And Musk is working on a pre-depression gold standard theory of how money works. And the government spending is itself a bad thing. Every dollar of government spending is a problem that should be eliminated. And you got to collect the money to make up for that spending. And what he's doing with firing 2.4 million government workers, he's going to fire half of them, fire a quarter of them. He doesn't realize that because there are too many government workers. Maybe there are too many government workers because the government employing people is in itself is an end in itself. Okay. If those million people get fired from the government, they have good jobs, they have decent salaries, they have benefits, they have pensions. If they get fired from the government, where are they going to go? The government has to hire people because the private sector in our capitalist society cannot. The private sector cannot provide the jobs that we need. And post-depression, smart capitalist economists realize this. The government has to spend money to create jobs. And, there was a famous Monopoly Capital book in the 60s by Paul Sweeney, Marxist book, about how in the middle of the height of the American economy in the mid-60s, the proportion of the populations employed in the private sector, in the military, on welfare, etc., was the same in the mid-60s as in the Depression, except there were more of them in the army. There were more of them on government assistance, etc. What you got to realize is that capitalism creates depressions and crises, and you have to try and avoid that. And employing people is one of the ways. And you do that in order to preserve the capitalist system as a whole. You have to provide enough material benefit for enough people that you maintain social stability. And what Musk is doing is destroying what is an employment program by the federal government. Because if you don't have that employment program, where are they going to go? They're not going to be hired. The private economy, the private sector in the American capitalism does not provide good jobs anymore. It just doesn't. So you're going to create another depression. You're going to throw people out of money, and you don't need to save the money. Money is no object for the federal government. Really, we have to get this straight. It doesn't collect taxes to fund programs. It doesn't sell treasury bonds to fund programs. We don't have to do that and shouldn't be doing it. But there's no it doesn't cost anybody anything if the federal government hires somebody. You have to hire people to do the right things. You have to hire people to do things that are productive.
And
what
hire the
you're
right
spending on is important, not how much you're spending.
And this whole point about the government has gotten too big. That's a fiction, because the government employment has remained relatively consistent since the 1960s. Even though the size of the country, the government employs, for simple math, probably about 2.3 million people.
Yeah.
And I want to say in the 60s, it was like 1.8, 1.9. So when you compare the size of the government with the growth of the population, the government has not grown to some exorbitant amount that now must be culled like deer that are eating my flowers. That's just a fiction.
Yeah. There's no prescribed size of government.
No,
okay. And the employment, as you say, is but the line that this is about waste, fraud, and abuse is always a bunch of bull. Okay. This is not about that. They like to, first of all, eliminate government interference with profit maximization. The Consumer Financial Control Board. Okay. I think I'm going to have to go. I have an emergency coming up.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Take care of that. I pray all goes well. We'll talk. Jim Kavanagh, thank you very much. All right. I appreciate it. Hey, folks, you can go back and look at the shows that you haven't seen. I strongly suggest that you do. There's a whole lot of analysis with John Jeter, with Dr. Jim Kavanagh, just a whole lot of Dr. Gerald Horn and Dr. Radhika Desai, and oh my goodness, there's a real treasure trove of information and analysis that you will find if you go back and listen to that music. Thank you, Cherie. So I strongly suggest you do so. Folks, please subscribe to the show through YouTube. Those of you that are watching on Twitter or through other avenues, please subscribe to the show on YouTube. Got some good likes today. Greatly appreciate it. I pray that, and let's please, whether you're praying or whether you're just sending a positive message, don't know what the emergency was for Dr. Kavanagh, but let's hope that all things work out well for him and his family in dealing with whatever that situation is. So I got to thank Dr. Jim Kavanagh for his time today. Folks, thank you for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. New episode tomorrow. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. You'll see all the links below in the description. Remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.